What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be diving into 2 Samuel chapter 13. And as we dive into this chapter, we're going to we're going to get an introductory, we're going to unpack some definition words, we're going to dive into the scripture, and then we are going to break the scripture down. But before we do it, this is a channel where we actually show people how to read and interpret the Bible chapter by chapter by chapter. So when we get to the New Testament, we are able to understand what Jesus Christ was going through and what he went through and what the Gospels actually mean. So we're building this foundation from the bottom to the top. Let's get right into the intro. When God gives you that peace, you will rest in his security, his protection, his comfort, his love. Before we start, I don't mean to minimize by saying the R word. I don't mean to offend, or I don't mean to come off in a way of that I'm trying to minimize the R word. But because of the YouTube channel, I wanted to be able to be exposed to many people who might fall into the category of the R word. And you will also see that I will use the R word as we go along, and you will understand what the R word is when I do start to talk about it. So I wanted to be clear about that, and I didn't want you to feel like I was minimizing the R word. So the introductory to 2 Samuel chapter 13 is the R word: incest and revenge and murder. This is a story of shame and disappointment, of despicable and reprehensible wickedness. And the tragic wickedness took place within the family of David. Because of David's terrible sin of adultery and murder, the hand of God's judgment continued to fall upon David's house. Just as all parents and children, David's sin influenced his children. His sinful behavior had impacted upon his children, especially his sons. His willingness to commit adultery was stamped especially on his sons. They were imprinted in their minds. They were influenced and impressed, swayed by his disposition to satisfy the lust of his flesh. As a result, his son began to follow in his footsteps, the shameful and tragic footsteps of an immoral and murder. This is the consequence of David's sin began to fall upon his household of the R word, incest, revenge, and murder, covered in this chapter today. Let's get into the definitions. The R word is the ultimate violation. A man or woman who is R word may experience the same type of terror the Levite's concubine must have felt. Physical death is not inevitable in every case of the R word, but almost any victim does feel as though a part of them has died. An R victim may suffer for some time from nightmares, severe and lingering fear, and feeling a low self-esteem. The victim of an R word should be encouraged to recognize God's promise never to leave or forsake them. A person victimized by R needs to seek comfort, healing from God, then from other believers. He or she must find a way of dealing with her anger towards, or his anger towards, the attacker. If he or she denies that anger, harbors in him or her, or focuses on revenge, she is on the dangerous, or he is on the dangerous of sinning him or herself. On the other hand, as he or she forgives the one who has wronged, he or she will open herself to recovery and growth. He or she. The process of healing is not easy and takes time, as our victim learns to rely on God for strength as well as healing. They will also learn their experience may be used for the Lord's glory and honor, perhaps even by sharing the healing he or she has received from God with other victims of that R word. Let's move on to incest. Incest in the household. The Bible does not use the word incest, but it strongly advocates the priority of most intimate family circle and speaks against sexual relationship between close family members. Incest describes the abuse and the distortion of God's ordained relationship. Sexual intimacy between close related persons was strictly prohibited, and the punishment was death, childlessness, or being cut off from the community. The person who committed such acts was cursed by God. In scripture, incest is addressed as the defilement of the recognized relationship of a parent and a child, a brother and a sister, a half brother, a half sister, a grandparent and grandchild, aunts and uncles, father and daughter-in-law, father and children. From polygamous unions, laws of the family fidelity sets believers apart from heathens, preserve emotional and physical, spiritual and psychological health, and guards against unhealthy genetic mutations. God has always been interested in the wholeness of the individual, and his laws are given to establish and maintain wholeness physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Perhaps the foremost incident of incest in the Bible is the one in which Lot's daughter encouraged their father to get drunk, and then each became pregnant by him. The act of incest produced two tribes with whom the Israelites struggled frequently and bitterly: the Moabites and the Ammonites. That is the definition of incest. Revenge, we know, and we have covered this already before. Revenge is to seek retaliation after you have been wronged, to come after someone because they've done you wrong, to get back at somebody that has done you wrong. And we also talked about murder. We don't talk about accidental murder that God talks about, but he does talk about a willful murder, something that is premeditated, something that you intended to do. And we're going to deal with this in this chapter today. So now that we have all of the definitions pulled out, now let's dive into the scriptures. Actually, before we dive into the scripture, I want to give you a story. There was a female that I was actually ministering to, and I ministered to her for some period of time, and she shared her story of her aunt's husband, which just so happened to be a police officer, was sexually assaulting her for some time, and she knew what was happening and she knew what was going on, and she didn't really know what to do. And she eventually told me that she wanted to do something about it, and she said that he was arrested, that she told her aunt, who did not believe her and really did not believe her, and that she was telling her aunt the truth, and that her aunt stopped talking to her. And even to this day, their relationship is strained. And I asked her, I said, how did you know to say something? What caused you to say something? Because, it will be a little bit intimidating for you to just up and want to say something. And she said, I was reading a book, and the book told me to do exactly what I did, and I did it. So I will hope that this video that someone is listening to will get the same encouragement as that girl that I spoke to, who I ministered to come out and to take courage, but also to seek the strength of the Lord and know that he's with you. So further ado, let's get right into this video. Verse 1. Now David's son Absalom had a beautiful sister named Tamar, and Amnon, half-brother, fell desperately in love with her. Amnon became so obsessed with Tamar that he became ill. She was a virgin, and Amnon thought he could never have her. But Amnon had a very crafty friend, his cousin Jenadab. He was the son of David's brother Shemiah. One day, Jenadab said to Amnon, "What's the trouble? Why should the son of a king look so dejected morning after morning?" So Amnon told him, "I am in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." Well, Jonadab said, "I'll tell you what to do. Go back to bed and pretend you are ill. When your father comes to see you, ask him to let Tamar come and prepare some food for you. Tell him you'll feel better if she prepares it, as you watch and feeds you with her own hands." So Amnon lay down and pretended to be sick, and when the king came to see him, Amnon asked him, "Please let my sister Tamar come and cook my favorite dish as I watch. Then I can eat from her own hands." So David agreed and sent Tamar to Amnon's house to prepare some food for him. When Tamar arrived at Amnon's house, she went to the place where he was lying down so he could watch her mix some dough. Then she baked a favorite dish for him. But when he set the serving tray before him, he refused to eat. "Everyone get out of here," Amnon told his servants, so they all left. Then he said to Tamar, "Now bring the food into my bedroom and feed it to me here." So Tamar took his favorite dish to him, but as she was feeding him, he grabbed her and demanded, "Come to bed with me, my darling sister." "No, my brother," she cried. "Don't be foolish. Don't do this to me. Such wicked things aren't done in Israel. Where could I go in my shame? And you'll be called one of the greatest fools in Israel. Please just speak to the king about it, and he will let you marry me." But Amnon wouldn't listen to her, and since he was stronger than she was, he argued her. Then suddenly Amnon's love turned to hate, and he hated her even more than he had loved her. "Get out of here," he snarled at her. "No, no," Tamar cried. "Sending me away now is worse than what you have already done to me." But Amnon wouldn't listen to her. He shouted for his servant and demanded, "Throw this woman out and lock the door behind her." So the servant put her out and locked the door behind her. She was wearing a long, beautiful robe, as was the custom in those days for the king's virgin daughter. But now Tamar tore her robe and put ashes on her head, and then, with her face in her hands, she went away crying. Her brother Absalom saw her and asked, "Is it true that Amnon has been with you?" "Well, my sister, keep quiet for now, since he's your brother. Don't worry about it." So Tamar lived as a desolate woman in her brother's Absalom's house. When King David heard what had happened, he was very angry, and though Absalom never spoke to Amnon about this, he hated Amnon deeply because of what he had done to his sister. 2 years later, when Absalom's sheep were being sheared at Balaam Hazor near Ephraim, Absalom invited all the king's sons to come to a feast. He went to the king and said, "My sheep shearers are now at work. Would the king and his servants please come to celebrate the occasion with me?" The king replied, "Now, my son, if we all came, we would be too much of a burden on you." Absalom pressed him, but the king would not come, though he gave Absalom his blessing. "Well then," Absalom said, "if you can't come, how about sending my brother Amnon with us?" "Why Amnon?" the king asked. But Absalom kept on pressing the king until he finally agreed to let all his sons attend, including Amnon. So Absalom prepared a feast fit for a king. Absalom told his men, "Wait until Amnon get drunk, then at my signal, kill him. Don't be afraid. I'm the one who has given the command. Take courage and do it." So Absalom signaled. They murdered Amnon. Then the other sons of the king jumped on their mules and fled. As they were on the way back to Jerusalem, this report reached David: "Absalom has killed all the king's sons. Not one is left alive." The king got up, tore his robe, and threw himself on the ground. His advisors also tore their clothes in honor and sorrow. But just then, Jonadab, the son of David's brother Shemiah, arrived and said, "No, don't believe that all the king's sons have been killed. It was only Amnon. Absalom has been plotting this ever since Amnon married his sister Tamar." "No, my lord the king, your sons aren't all dead. It was only Amnon." Meanwhile, Absalom escaped. Then the watchman of the Jerusalem wall saw a great crowd coming down the hill on the road from the west. He ran to tell the king, "I see a crowd of people coming from Heronium Road along the side of the hill." "Look," Jonadab told the king, "they are now. The king's sons are coming. Just as I said." They soon arrived, weeping and sobbing, and the king and all his servants wept bitterly with them. And David mourned many days for his son Amnon. Absalom fled to his grandfather Talmaiah, son of Amminahud of the king of Jeshurun. He stayed there in Jeshurun for 3 years. And King David, now reconciled to Amnon's death, longed to be reunited with his son Absalom. That is God's holy word. Let's break this down. What we'll discover in verses 1 to 22 is the R word of Tamar by Amnon. This lesson is on lust and immorality. Lust is a sinful longing, the inward sin which leads to the falling away from God. Lust, the origin of sin, has its place in the heart, not necessity, but because it is the central of all moral forces and impulses and of spiritual activity. Lusts are object of desire. Immorality is the lack morals. You get morals from the Bible. Anything outside of the Bible is immoral. So let's break it down. The burning lust of Amnon for Tamar, his beautiful half-sister. Absalom's full sister, craved and lust so much he became ill. We also read he could not figure out a way to get her sexually. She lived a pure and righteous life. The evil scheme suggested by Jenadab, Amnon's friend and cousin. Jenadab noticed and questioned why Amnon looked so dejected, troubled, meaning. Amnon shared his infatuation, craving for Tamar. Jenadab suggested a scheme to lure Tamar into his bedroom. He was to pretend to be ill and go to bed. He was to ask his father David to order Tamar to prepare and feed him one of his special meals. But that evil scheme carried out. Amnon pretended to be ill and went to bed and was visited by David, requested David to ask Tamar to prepare one of his special meals and feed it to him. David agreed and ordered Tamar to go to do Amnon's request. Tamar obeyed her father's orders. She went to Amnon's house, baked a special bread for him. He watched and lusted after her. She took the bread to him. Amnon pretended to be so sick he could not eat. He ordered everyone out except Tamar. He then asked Tamar to bring the food to him in the privacy of his own bedroom to feed him there, and she did as he requested. See, the incest by Amnon, his of Tamar, his half-sister. He grabbed her and begged her to have relations with her. She resisted. She said, "No, don't." Reminded him it was a crime in Israel to do this. She appealed to his conscience. It was wicked. She begged him to think of their reputations. She would be disgraced and he would be ruined. He would be called a wicked fool. Asked him to control his urges and asked permission to marry her. He refused to even listen. He arred her, and he committed incest. The shortcomings of Amnon, his shame, R-word, and incest, all immediately turned his emotions from attraction to hate because he knew he did wrong. He ordered Tamar out. He refused, for they now needed to be married. She had been violated. She could not legally be offered to another man, not by her father. Amnon refused to listen, called his personal servant to evict her, and bolt the door. The terrible results of the R-word and incest. Tamar suffered deep anguish and grief. She tore her robe, the robe that she wore by a virgin daughter of the king, put ashes on her head and wept, and covered her face as she ran out. Tamar was broken and forced to live the life of a desolate woman. Absalom found out about the R-word. Absalom moved Tamar into his own house to care for her, to provide a sense of security for her. David heard all that had happened and was furious. Absalom grew bitter, hated Amnon, but he remained silent. He harbored that anger, that revenge. He said absolutely nothing. The revenge of Absalom we see in verses 23 to 36. This is a lesson on revenge and murder. Absalom devised a plot against Amnon. 2 years later, he harbored all that anger and revenge for 2 years, involved a sheep shearing celebration. Absalom personally invited David and his officials. David refused. Absalom urged him time and time again. David continued to refuse but gave his blessing. Absalom then asked if Amnon, the future heir and prince, could be official representative, and David was suspicious. Absalom kept urging him. David finally sent all his sons as representatives. Absalom ordered his men to kill Amnon. They apparently balked and feared David. He assured them he would take responsibility. Absalom's orders were carried out. The servants murdered Amnon. The king's son fled. Absalom's murderous deed was falsely reported to David, that Absalom had killed all his sons, not one left. David went into a period of mourning, remembering Nathan's words. David's servants mourned with him. David was encouraged by his nephew Jonadab. He was certain that all of the sons had not been killed, only Amnon. He knew that Absalom had been set on revenge since Amnon's ard Tamar. He felt David should dismiss the report as false. It was likely that only Amnon was dead. Absalom escaped, and all the sons returned to the palace. A watchman on the city wall spotted a group of people in the distance rushing towards the city. He reported the facts to David. Jonadab verified the report. They were David's sons. The sons entered the palace grief stricken. David and his servants wept over the calamity that had fallen on them. But now in verses 37 to 39, we will see the agony of David in reaping the fruit of his own sin. Remember, he committed adultery and murder. This is a lesson on reaping what one sows. We see this in Galatians chapter 6 verse 7. Don't be misled. You cannot mock the justice of God. You will always harvest what you plant. He grieved his murdered son. He grieved over the loss of Absalom. He stayed in Jeshurun for 3 years. He longed for reconciliation with Absalom. This was, I have to admit, a horrible story to tell, a hard lesson to teach. I think it's because I have 2 daughters myself, and to know that if that happened to my babies, how I would feel. And I want to know, what would you do? In the comments below. Let me know what you will do in the comments below. So stay tuned. The next video we will be diving into 2 Samuel chapter 14. I'll see you soon. God bless you and God bless your family.